This week our man David Crowe is on leave, so joining me on the podcast today we have National Affairs Editor James Massola and Senior Economics Correspondent Shane Wright. Welcome to the program, gentlemen.
G'day, Jackie.
We can't fill the Crowe's feet, but...
They're big shoes to fill.
We will try.
We'll do our best.
Shane, you wrote a really great piece this week that was sort of a budget follow-up, an afterthought, if you like, which had a lot of impact. It was about a line item in the budget that wasn't widely reported last week, which was $6.5 billion put aside for defence veterans. So it was no small item. Tell us about what you wrote.
Well, it's sad that things like this keep me awake at night. Most people after budget curl up with a good book and or a bad movie and go to sleep. But I'd quite angered by a particular paragraph that was on page 97 of budget paper number 1. For those lucky of us not to have ever seen a federal budget, they are enormous things. And in this section of the budget, it tries to explain why the government has had to spend money in particular areas. And we talk often about the table of truth, which reconciles spending that the government has done because they've made a decision and spending or money they found down the back of a chair because the economy's improved or gone backwards. Anyway, this one line just said we've had to spend $6.5 billion over the next 5 years because we're putting on extra staff in Veterans Affairs to deal with all the claims that we've now got underway. Now, that started to make my blood boil, and by the end of the week it had boiled over to the point, of scalding, because it transpires that this goes back to the Morrison government, which had got a situation within the Veterans Affairs Department of using labour hire, which it had used across all of the departments to try and reduce the headcount of public servants. The problem was in Veterans Affairs and in other portfolios that labour hire, these people tend to turn over quite often, 2, 3, 4 months. In Veterans Affairs, it takes about 6 months to properly train a person to go through line by line all these claims that were coming through from Veterans Affairs. So the Morrison government had actually encouraged people within the Defence Force close to retirement or close to leaving, right, get your claim in, and that way you'll have a seamless revenue source to look after you. The problem was they didn't have enough staff, and the staff they did just couldn't do that work. So by the time you get to the election in 2022, there's 50,000 people, former veterans, whose claims had not even been allocated to staff within Veterans Affairs to get processed.
And the wait times too, don't forget, Shane.
Yeah.
So that you've got 50,000 people there unallocated. The average waiting time was, like more than 300 days.
Yep.
Was some extraordinary percentage of people waiting more than 300 days, about 10,000 people waiting more than 400 days. And then once your claim actually gets allocated, it was sitting on a desk, a public servant's desk, for, on average, 430, 440 days.
Right.
That's come down to 373 days. That's an improvement. You only have to wait a bit more than a year now once you've got... It's crazy.
So you end up with the situation that Andrew G, if you remember, the last Veterans Affairs Minister in the Morrison government, had threatened to resign from Cabinet because he was so peed off with the situation he was facing. So to effectively pay him off, Josh Frydenberg used his last budget to employ 90 extra staff. Yeah. And then Matt Keogh comes in as the Veterans Affairs Minister, and Jim Chalmers and Katie Gallagher, the Finance Minister, and they've gone, oh my God. So they actually employed 500 extra staff in the October budget, and since then there was extra allocation of money for staff in last week's budget.
Yeah, another 141.
Another 141.
So when the coalition, it's a somewhat controversial point to make, but Jackie, but I'll make it. Public servants aren't all lazy people on high salaries doing nothing. Shock exclusive, you heard it here first. Some of them work pretty hard. Some of them actually, in fact, I'm sure most of them work pretty hard. They actually do things of consequence, and this is one of them. So with all those extra staff from the 22 October budget, the people not allocated is down to around 2,000 people with an average wait time of about 2 weeks. So that's a massive improvement. Those files are actually sitting on the desks of public servants now. But what is not happening, we touched on this a moment ago, there's still that 373-day average wait time to get money for your medicine or to get physiotherapy or whatever it might be that you're applying for, help with PTSD.
Yeah.
People die waiting for this help
Yeah.
to come through.
Well, there's
right?
a slogan along those lines, isn't there? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's what I picked up, is that within the veterans community, it's delay, deny, die. And within the government, they're just finding people who are just resigning themselves to the fact that you won't ever get paid. Now, you could be absolutely cynical and think, well, this is a design feature. It's not a design flaw, because the longer you delay having someone's claim processed, the less time they'll actually be on the entitlement before they die.
Absolutely.
Or something else happens to them. And you've not only got that aspect of it, which has upset so many people, and it angered me, but also the fact that you've got this whole cohort of veterans coming through the system, particularly out of Afghanistan and Iraq. You don't see it often, where you see something that's so egregious. And this wasn't this government's fault. This was a problem that had to be solved for the betterment of a lot of people.
Well, we think of it, budgets can be so dry and so boring, and they're about the headline figures and the data and stuff, but what we miss so often in our reporting is that these are policies and money allocated which can change people's lives and do change people's lives on the ground. James, you talked to some veterans about the impact of dealing with the Department of Veterans Affairs. What did they say about that experience?
Yeah, look, I spoke to a couple of guys and to some veterans advocates as well. The two fellas I spoke to, a guy called Pete Rudlin, who is a former SASR and commando who was in a Black Hawk crash in 2010 in Afghanistan, and then another fellow called Paul McGlynn, who's a former RAF mechanic who had an accident back in 1983 when he was about 25 years old, and he was trying to install a new generator on what was then one of our jets, a Mirage jet. He was, as he says, he's a bit embarrassed about it. I was, an idiotic 23-year-old. I was trying to pick up the generator by myself. I did it. It fell back on me, and then I couldn't move, right? And it took he left the service in 99. It took him 20 years to get to the point where his back was so bad that he actually did need some help. And then he had a bit of a nightmarish experience, really, with DVA going back and forth. It took, I think in his case it was about 18 months before he got approval. Now, he didn't want to criticise DVA at all. He was really quite striking all the way through. Make sure you say that I'm grateful and what have you. But, as a neutral observer, I kind of listened to his experience, was a bit shocked. Pete, indulge me just a moment. Pete was even more extraordinary, Jax. I've got my phone here because I want to read to you. I spoke to each of these guys for about an hour, and I said to him, what happened to you? And he talks about how he doesn't remember the day of the accident. The last thing he remembers is planning the seating plan for his, for his Black Hawk helicopter, where his snipers would sit, that sort of thing. And the next thing, he sort of wakes up in a hospital in Germany. I said, what injuries? And he said, and he was so matter-of-fact about it. He said, I broke my right leg, my rifle was embedded in my quad, I broke my pelvis, I injured my lumbar, I had a thoracic injury, I broke my eye socket, my cheekbone and my nose, I had a frontal lobe brain bleed, I damaged my kidney and liver, and I broke my left kneecap. And someone tells you that, and they're so matter-of-fact, no, it doesn't define me, no. It was an opportunity because it meant I left the service and now I'm able to help other veterans in other ways.
And how long did he have to wait for his entitlements to come through?
Well, see, that was interesting. I was just getting to that. Good question, Jax. Shane just mentioned that under the Morrison government, they started trying to set up a system where you're in the service and you can transition seamlessly over to DVA. So there's not that wait for entitlement. So Pete's done 7 years of physiotherapy. He's had 403 million operations. He's permanently damaged as a human being. And I don't mean that rudely. It's just when you have an accident like that. So he was in that process in 2017 or so. DVA, it wasn't seamless. Again, he wasn't critical of them at all, but they were saying, no, that pain-killing drug, because he's on painkillers for the rest of his life, we don't fund that one. We only fund this one, so you can't have that one that you're getting through defence. They have some rule about you can only do 1 half-hour physio session per day that they'll pay for. Now, he lives 40 k's outside of Perth, 80K round trip to his physio. He was sort of saying to them, I don't want to have to spend, drive rather, 80K's round trip each day, 5 days a week. And because he's doing, multiple sets of physio, an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, it doesn't make any sense. Now, eventually they came round and saw sense in both cases, which is why he's saying, no, I didn't have such a bad experience. But again, he just said, look, both men, in fact, said there are all these rules. It's quite, I get why they have these rules. It's quite regulated, but there needs to be a bit more flexibility in the system. And people need to listen to vets more.
Well, you can just, particularly if you had complex PTSD or something like that, the system would be so hard to navigate at the best of times. Thank you for elucidating that story, because it wasn't anywhere else in the media, and it was really great that we got to hear about that. So, Shane, Opposition Leader Peter Dutton has even very recently complained that the number of public servants has swelled under the Albanese government. So if Dutton is elected at the next election, are we likely to see him cut the public service back again?
Yeah, I think it's hard for them not to reconcile what they want to do. Say we're going to be talking about their nuclear power policy over the coming days, weeks, months. How do you pay for it? Well, you've got to find a way to cut spending. And so straight off they'll go, right, public servants out of control. Even today, so Thursday, Paul Fletcher was complaining that all these people, public servants, are coming into Services Australia, which had been run down again. This goes to the labour hire issue, which the previous government had used. They'd run down the service, run down the number of public servants, and then found, oh, hell, we can't deal with all the people, all the decisions that public servants are required to make. This has happened in environment as well, where decisions are being delayed or pushed back or just can't get processed because there haven't been enough staff. So it's a really interesting dynamic where you've got the opposition saying, right, too many public servants, ignoring what their policy of not having public servants has actually caused. And that comes back to that column I wrote. It means, right, in the next 5 years, including within 2 years, there's going to be a $3 billion extra payment out to veterans because they just hadn't processed their claims because they didn't have the staff to deal with it. Ultimately, running a government requires public servants. Even John Howard discovered this when he famously came to power in 96. He sent Canberra went into a recession in 96, 97 because they started cutting so many people. But then they realised, oh, hell, we actually need public servants. We actually need those decision makers, those people to process what we're doing. Otherwise, government falls apart.
It's the laziest. I have to get my Canberra rant hat on. It's the laziest, tiredest, most repeated trick in the coalition playbook, and it's dishonest. Public servants work hard. I know I've touched on this before, but this happens every time a coalition government comes to power. What it ignores is that billions of dollars are going out the door to pay Big Four consulting firms, other consultants,
and the labour hire companies, to do the jobs of public servants. Now, if I had a buck for every time I met someone who was once a public servant, I don't know, earning a sort of an average salary, if you like, who's then gone out as a consultant and is charging the government 3 times as much or twice as much to do the same damn job they were doing in the public service a year ago, I would be a very rich man. And these people are getting rich because of this trend or vogue for outside consultants. Well, now, one of the things I think Katie Gallagher's done that's really smart is create a kind of flying squad, if you like, of people, public servants, who can go into different departments and perform some of these functions on a temporary basis, ramp up the capacity of finance or environment or whatever it might be for a period of time. I think it's a much smarter option, and I think the sooner the coalition learns that public servant bashing is cheap politics that's counterproductive to good government, the better the country will be.
James, you also wrote a story this week about public servants of a different nature, the sort of power brokers within the ministry, which was interesting. Sort of the real roles that the ministers have in the machinery of making the government work as opposed to their official titles. Can you just walk us through sort of just very quickly, like the main inner circle, say, of Albanese's government?
Sure. Penny Wong-Jacks is the most important person in the Albanese government after the man himself. She is a veteran politician like Albo. She's been around, I think she was 21 in taking the Senate. He turns to her for advice. He turns to her for emotional support. He turns to her, to bounce ideas off. She's been a finance minister. She's been a climate change minister. Now she's the foreign minister. Repairing our relations in the South Pacific, building our relations in Southeast Asia, thawing our relations with Beijing. These have been the three key foreign policy goals of Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong. Like, they're absolutely in lockstep. They've done a pretty good job on all three of those things, I'd say. Probably neglected Europe a bit. That places Penny Wong at the heart of the government. The other sort of three key players for me, Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, not as close with Albanese, will go a few days at a time without talking. Sometimes the pair will go a few days at a time. Then they'll talk 6 times in a day or 8 times in a day. Everything, across a range of policy issues. Katie Gallagher is probably, in fact, you'd probably put her ahead of Jim Chalmers. Not a high-profile person in terms of a public persona, but she's Finance Minister for the Public Service and Minister for Women. She's been a Chief Minister of the ACT. She knows how government works.
I was going to say, finance ministers have been really important. Matthias Cormann was really important. Yep. Lindsay Tanner was
and Wong in the Gillard government.
Nick Minchin is another finance minister. They do. Not many people see them. Like Katie Gallagher is interesting because she's got the Minister for Women.
Yep.
So that's pushed her in, and there's so much in that space going on. That's pushed her a bit forward. But I think poor old finance ministers often get neglected, but they can be the policy and the workhorse, but also the person inside a government that the PM can actually look to.
First person who says no, at the ERC table is the finance minister. No, we're not spending that. Where's the savings to offset the spending on that? Those sorts of things. So Chalmers, Gallagher, Wong. The last person I had was Tony Burke, who's more for political reasons. Like, he's keeping the Labor union base happy with union-friendly industrial relations legislation. He's done that well, but it's actually why he matters. And he's in a sort of a different concentric circle, if that makes sense, to the three I've just mentioned, is how he runs the House, how he keeps charge of the Parliament, how he determines the timing of legislation. Albanese himself's a former leader of the House. I think they see politics the same way. I think they're both institutionalists, people who understand the traditions of the Parliament, respect them. I think...
And their electorate's a butt.
Yeah.
They're in the same neck of the woods.
Yep.
Can you say a butt again? It's such a good verb. It's so underused.
A butt. Their electorate's a butt, Jackie.
Very quickly, guys, I want to go to Angus Taylor's budget reply speech, which was at the National Press Club on Wednesday. Did we learn anything new? And did he make a little bit of a mistake? Because he seemed to say something that was at variance with his leader, Peter Dutton.
Yeah, we're into the population wars that are going on, and the argument is whether he has misspoken, and we're getting into the weeds of net overseas migration or the migration intake, which are two different things. And whether he's supporting a 25% fall in one number compared to the other and the time frame of this reduction, but actually goes back to Peter Dutton speaking on radio in Sydney on Friday last week, in which he actually, so the day after his budget in reply speech, he gave a different answer to what he had actually said in his speech. And so this is causing confusion, not just within the Liberal Party, because we're speaking on Thursday, even today, Deputy Leader Susan Lee has suggested this cut is going to be ongoing. She's used the word ongoing, which then means not just the 3-year term of the Dutton government, if that came to pass, but beyond that. So that has huge ramifications to the population, to skilled migration, to the economy, as every treasurer understands, and Treasury will sit you down as soon as Jackie Maley becomes the next treasurer. They tell you, right, if you change the population projections, you have an economic impact. Peter Costello used to talk about productivity, participation, and population. Population, and if you look at, say, the intergenerational reports that Costello introduced, population is a huge economic swing factor. And this is, like, as much as Peter Dutton has been talking about, say, impact on housing, migrants are taking up time, your space and time, start cutting it. Yep, those migrants aren't there. They're not serving your coffee. They're not helping you build a new mine in Western Australia.
They're not looking after...
Or build houses.
And they're not looking after our elderly population in aged care facilities.
That's exactly right. And so this has got a long way to go. And you can see in the way that Angus Taylor struggled to articulate absolutely clearly what their position is on just one element of it, that this could be a real problem for the next 12 months.
I mean, James, I want to ask you about the politics of it, because it is very difficult to follow actually what the coalition policy is at the moment, and it's very confusing, particularly for outsiders. It's like net migration versus permanent, and temporary migrants and so forth, student visas. I mean, is Peter Dutton onto a winner here in just sort of headline populist terms, as in people do feel the crush of infrastructure in our cities, particularly the housing crisis is real, and if he promises to cut migration, will that cut through to some people, or are people going to be like, you guys don't even know what your own policy is?
No, I think it's a winner, frankly. The Resolve poll we had earlier this week made that very clear. People favour a cut in migration for the reasons you've just made clear, Jackie. I think Dutton's plan cuts through. It's more, what's the word? It's not ambitious. It goes further than Labor's plan. I think both plans are welcome, because Labor, of course, wants to reduce the number of foreign students coming in, primarily foreign students. I don't think people are in the weeds on, as much as we might find it interesting, on Angus Taylor said this, but did he really mean that, and what have you. Closer to the election, people focus their minds on the detail.
Yeah.
This far out, I don't think so.
And the overarching message will be that under Peter Dutton, migration will be cut, and that will be better for easing those population pressures. Yeah.
And that fairly obvious nuance about, who's going to look after that we've all just made, who's going to look after the elderly? Who's going to serve us coffee?
Who's going
to build our houses?
Working
How
age
are we
population?
To, stop the...
we'll worry about that later.
Yeah, exactly. People are feeling the pressure.
Gentlemen, that was really entertaining. We covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate seeing you and hearing you.
Yep. It's a pleasure, Jack.
The pleasure is ours seeing you, Jackie. It certainly is.
Yep.